As communicators, we are often asked to respond to decisions that have already been made, projects that have already been funded, or crises that have already occurred. In short, we're often more reactive than proactive. We're working with what people give us rather than guiding them to it at the decision-making table. But our true value can come from actually seeing the future, or at least anticipating it. As communication professionals, we have a role to play in building, protecting, and enhancing the reputation of our businesses and the leaders within those businesses. But we can't do that effectively if we don't look forward, not just backwards or sideways. So how do we do that without a crystal ball? Well, that's what today's guest is going to unveil for us. Anne-Marie Blake is the co-founder of True, a boutique consultancy specialising in people-centred change, employee communication and behavioural science. Before launching True in 2023 with Howard Craze, who has previously been a guest on this show, Anne-Marie spent more than 2 decades working in-house, leading communication and change programs for major organisations. Her contribution to the communications industry has been recognised with fellowships of the CIPR, PRCA and the Centre for Strategic Communication Excellence. A serial volunteer, Anne-Marie is currently chair of the IABC Heads of Communication SIG and a member of the CIPR Inside Committee, and she sits on the board of the GCCC. She regularly speaks and writes on communication, change and employee experience. And I asked Anne-Marie to come on the show today because I recently saw her speak at the IABC World Conference in Toronto, where she shared her insights into horizon scanning for comms professionals. What is horizon scanning and why should we do it? Well, I will not steal Anne-Marie's thunder, but trust me that if you are struggling with how you position yourself as more valuable than someone who writes emails, then you want to listen to this episode. So without further ado, here's Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie Blake, welcome to Let's Chat and More Matter.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. Before we get stuck into today's topic, which is a juicy one, can you tell our listeners a little bit about you? Who are you? What do you do? How did you come to develop your expertise in this space?
Oh, my goodness me. Right. So I'll give you the kind of potted version because otherwise we will take up all of the podcasts because I am that old. But so I spent most of my career in-house. I didn't actually start off doing comms, actually. I started off in a kind of marketing role. And then, as always with these things, there's a fantastic boss that sees potential in you, asks you to do something. I said yes to it. So that something was heading up her comms function, which I did. And I actually found that I really enjoyed it. So I spent many years in-house, mainly around financial services. And then 3 years ago, together with my co-founder, Howard, who has also been on this podcast, we set up True. So we kind of wanted to pool our expertise around change. So we kind of both have strong opinions on how change should be done. And that is with people, not to people. And we wanted to kind of help organisations basically implement change well. So that's kind of what we wanted to do. And that's what we do with True. So that's part of the Anne-Marie. And then the other part of Anne-Marie is I'm a serial volunteer for the industry, because I am really quite keen that we understand a lot of the theory behind why we do what we do. So I spend a bit of time teaching. I am quite heavily involved in all of the professional bodies. So CIPR, IABC, what's the other one? PRCA. So I'm involved in all of those. And I also teach as well. So it's quite nice actually, as you get to being quite senior in your career, it allows you to kind of do other things and give back to the profession. So that is me.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you. And that's how we met too, is through IABC. So like you, I'm a serial volunteer, at least for them. I think I'm on about 3 different committees right now. So we can't help ourselves.
I was going to say, if you want something done, ask a busy person is what they say.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So the reason I wanted to get you on the show today is I saw you speak at the most recent IABC World Conference, and it was all about horizon scanning and why and how communication professionals should be doing horizon scanning. And I would love to delve into more of that. But for those of our listeners who may not understand that term, let's start with the basics. What is horizon scanning?
Yeah, no problem at all. So, I mean, there might be quite a few interpretations of it, but the way I like to phrase it is the future is coming, whether you are ready or not. So it's probably better that you are ready. So horizon scanning is really about looking across the environment, scanning for kind of weak signals that will help you prepare, not predict. That's a really important distinction, but prepare for what is happening. And, it's really important now as we're sitting here in 2026, aren't we? Where we're living in a world that is extremely volatile. We've got, geopolitics happening over here. We've got AI happening over there. And so, the world is not constant, and it's always better from a kind of organizational and preparedness point of view that you're looking at your strategy and thinking, actually, if we've made these assumptions in coming up with our plans and our strategies, what would happen if? So it's kind of just getting people prepared for things, because I'm never surprised by people's propensity to be surprised by what is happening, because there are always signals of change, always signals. It's whether we're looking out for them or not. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I sometimes use the analogy, I've promised not to use it too many times, but around spiders and meerkats. So if you think about a spider is sitting in the middle of the web, waiting kind of for the world to kind of happen around them. And meerkats, they kind of scan in the environment for opportunities and threats. Do you want to be a spider or do you want to be a meerkat? That's sometimes the analogy I use.
I like it. I love an animal analogy. And a spider one in particular will resonate a lot with the Australians listening.
Of course, yes.
One of the things you mentioned just then was the world that we're living in now. And there was a term you mentioned at World Conference, I think it was Barney, B-A-N-I.
Oh, yeah, Barney, yeah.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So most of us will be familiar with VUCA. If you've ever sat through any conferences on change, they'll often say that we're living in a volatile, uncertain, kind of world. So Barney, I think, is the kind of next iteration on that. And I wish I could remember who came up with it, because then I would credit it. Maybe you can put those in the show notes when I send it to you. But it basically stands for, we're living in a world that's quite brittle, that's anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. So if you think, so other people will talk about us living in a polycrisis, which is about having multiple different things happening all at once, and the impact on an individual in terms of trust and anxiety. And that's what we really need to be preparing for. So, what has got us here is not going to get us there. And we definitely need to be prepared for thinking about the environment that we're living in, not the one that we want to be living in, but we have to deal with what we're living in, don't we? And being kind of prepared around that. So that was kind of why I kind of referred to Banny and the need to, constantly be thinking about, what if this happens? What if that happens?
I do think it is that the what if question, so isn't it? And it's not necessarily an anxious question. To me, it's more of a curious question.
Yeah.
It's, what could be coming on the horizon, and what if that did happen? How would we respond, or would we be ready for it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I sometimes think about it as in fact, when I did IBC World Conference last year and introduced the topic, I talked about it being both an art and a science. So the science is basically the process that you go through to kind of identify your weak signals, think about your question, etc. And the art is kind of interpreting that and asking, so what and what if? And I don't think we do enough of that as a profession. And I think with horizon scanning, we have two roles, really. So one is about getting our kind of comms functions ready for what's happening next, but also helping the organisation, who should also be doing this as a discipline, bring that to life, think about the narrative so that our people can come with us, so our people can see themselves as part of that future. And if you think of, some of the foresight work as something that happens in a room over there with some very clever people, then that's not going to work. People aren't going to feel part of that. It needs to be something that's embedded in the organisation.
Yeah, that's so true. It's that co-creation that when people have skin in the game, they tend to put more effort into the game as well.
Yeah. And look, this is not something that's new. I mean, Shell have been doing this for over 50 years. They've got a futures unit that they've been using for over 50 years. And I think they're kind of, to me, they're like pioneers in this space, kind of using that stuff to inform a lot of their strategy. So it's not something that I've invented. It's, it's been around for quite a long time. But I was struck by when I first, I was actually at a conference when I kind of heard someone talking about horizon scanning in a different context. And it just occurred to me, why aren't we doing more of this as communicators and PR professionals? So that's kind of where my interest in it stemmed from.
Your origin story. So, Anne-Marie, none of us have a crystal ball, unfortunately, or maybe
Mhm.
fortunately. So how do we actually do horizon scanning? What are some of the more useful processes for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I kind of do have a kind of process that I take organizations through, but let me kind of try and summarize it for you a bit. So I'm a very good communicator. So as you will imagine, I will start by setting my objectives. So what is it that I want to be scanning for? And I think I would advise you to really think hard about that objectives, because what you want to do is be looking at a question that you don't already know the answer to. So I think a lot of what, people do when they're kind of, maybe doing the planning is they'll start with a question where they kind of already know the answer, and then they're using that insight to kind of give credibility to the answer they've already come up with. So this has to be a question that you truly do not know the answer to. So kind of just set that. And then you need to think about your horizon. So kind of one of the phrases about H1, H2, H3. So if you think about H1 as immediate future, maybe the next 6 months or so. And then H2 is kind of up to 3 years, and H3 is maybe 3 to 5 years. You kind of set that horizon. So that's the second bit of the process that you want to look at. And then the third bit, and I guess this is where you can use maybe kind of AI to help you a little bit, is identifying your different sources. So I am always quite intrigued. At the beginning of the year, there are tons and tons and tons of reports that come out, whether it be future trends or the future of work, or, risk reports or whatever. There's lots of that. But you cannot use all of it with the best will in the world. So identify what are the sources that you're going to use for that. So that will be different whether you're working in external comms, reputation, or internal comms, but you need to decide that. No one can tell you what those sources are. And then once you've identified the sources, what you need to do is scan for patterns. So this isn't about one thing, or this is not about the loudest thing, but what are the patterns that these sources are telling you? And then it's where you're kind of just asking the what if question. So, we have built our plan, our strategy, our approach on this set of assumptions. But what if those assumptions don't hold true? So I had a conversation with someone at a university quite recently who said that they were investing quite a bit of resource into building new buildings for their university. So I said, well, have you thought about the future of learning, for example? People might not be coming into buildings to do that learning. You're spending all these money on these buildings that could be empty. So this is kind of why you need to kind of really stress test it a little bit as well. And then you need to think about the implementation. So this is about kind of what narrative you're going to come up with. What are the things that may well hinder kind of the future? So this is where, thinking about things like trust, misinformation, disinformation will come into that as well, in terms of people kind of believing you. Thinking about, how you can involve people in it as well. And then the other thing I would say, if you're listening to this and getting a bit thinking, oh my goodness, I've got a day job to do. How am I going to do this already? This is not a solo endeavor. This is where you want to get as many diverse perspectives as possible, because they all will be bringing something to the kind of virtual table. So whether you're doing this for an organization or whether you're doing this just for your comms function, you just really need to be thinking about all of those things.
Okay, so just to play that back, so we set a question that we don't know the answer to. We look at what are our horizons, and then we do the research, essentially use all those legitimate, obviously, data points that are out there, and pull that together. To what extent, and I'm just thinking back to the conversation I actually had with Howard around the listening organization. So to what extent do you take current data points from your business into this process? Because obviously they just represent a point in time, but are there trends from within the business that you can extrapolate from, do you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. And listening is a real key part of it. And let me give you kind of a real life example. I have to maybe anonymize some of it because
Yes, we'll make up some names.
talk about what we do. But we were doing some focus groups and about a specific topic. And a couple of things kept coming up as we were doing those focus groups. And in this instance, it was about so the focus groups weren't about the cost of living. It was about a slightly different topic. But there was a key theme that kept coming up in some of these focus groups. And what it showed the organisation is that their employees were really, really worried about the cost of living. That's something that came up in a number of them. And if you could just kind of ignore that, but actually what it suggested to the organization was there's something on that, people's minds that they needed to do something about pretty quickly. So, this is an example of you need to not just listen for things that you already know the answer to. So, as a lot of focus groups do, but also be listening for some of those weak signals. And in this instance, the weak signal was, the cues and the things that people were talking about. So they didn't actually kind of verbalize, I'm really worried about the cost of living, but they were the weak signals that were coming through that all pointed to the same theme, which is around we're worried about the cost of living, which meant that the kind of HR team had to go away and kind of think about what can we do to help our people around the cost of living. So that's kind of an immediate, kind of H1 thing that you could do about it. I also, I try not to talk about AI too much because there are lots of other people that do that constantly. But I also think that because of the noise around AI, we're not also listening to some of the other signals around kind of what that means for the world of work, what that means for how we organize ourselves, what that means for how we communicate, what that means for trust, etc. So it's all about not necessarily looking at what is immediately in front of you, but what are the weaker signals, the quieter things that are happening that we need to be paying attention to now because they may well come and influence us in the future.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. All the noise that I'm hearing, and certainly all the conferences I've been going to in the last probably 3 years, it's all been about AI. AI is changing our profession, and it is. And then I keep hearing we have to reposition ourselves as strategic advisors. We have been saying that for 10 years. Why can we just do that already? But it is, outside of that, like you say, there's I think there's such tunnel vision right now on that alone. Nobody's really asking the question, well, what else could be impacting our profession that we haven't noticed? Or, and it's not necessarily a negative impact. There could be opportunities we're missing.
Yeah, but also from a horizon scanning and foresight perspective, AI is kind of already here. So I wouldn't also be focusing that too much in terms of, okay, so what is a question I do not know the answer to,
Yes.
and kind of just setting my objectives around that.
So let's say you've done this exercise for a business and you've said, okay, these are the outcomes. We reckon that this is something to look to and this is something to look to. How do you then take that into a comms team, into like a corporate affairs team and their strategy and their planning?
Yeah, so this is well, maybe it's just about me, but I think this is a really fun bit. This is a really fun bit because I think sometimes as communicators, there's a lot of time spent on the hamster wheel, just doing the stuff and churning it out. But there's an exercise that I sometimes do, which is around scenario thinking or scenario planning. And so this is where you look at two plausible futures. So these aren't things that are definitely going to happen, but these are things that might happen. And then you plot them on a grid and then you name the different futures, as it were, and based upon whether they're kind of high impact, low impact, or likely to happen, not likely to happen. But you basically plot them. And then you kind of, against those plausible futures, you ask yourself questions. What will that mean for how we recruit? What will that mean for how we communicate? What will that mean for some of our messages? And then you can really start testing the future. So you'll have those in your kind of back pocket and be prepared for them. So you're not surprised. But that's a really fun exercise that you could do with your team because it does really stretch the creative muscle. And Howard and I were in Kenya last November, and we spent 2 weeks doing this exercise with a team out there, and it was just such fun because you don't think like this day to day. And so what it does is really open their eyes to kind of the possibilities and things that they should be thinking about and things that they should be preparing for now as well. So, and that can include anything from messages to kind of, okay, so what capabilities will we need in the team if this is a plausible future, and kind of just to start thinking about that and prioritizing that as well.
Yeah, perfect. So the people who are listening to this podcast, oftentimes they are in corporate affairs teams or change teams. How could they encourage their leaders to participate in these processes or see the value in doing these processes? Because again, there's probably a few teams out there who's, the senior leadership team go, well, they do the website and they do this. They're not considering them as part of the enterprise planning. So
Yeah.
how could we convince them otherwise?
So it depends where your organisation is in terms of the whole kind of horizon scanning foresight. So some organisations are already doing it, but their comms team don't know about it. I kind of spoke to one of those the other day. So sometimes that's about making the introductions and talking about how, as a comms team, we can help you bring those scenarios and futures to life. So that's one scenario. If you have an organisation where they're not thinking about it at all, maybe you just have to kind of show them like where we are. Look at the last 5 crises that we had, that we had to deal with. All of those were pretty predictable. All of those, there were signals. We need to get better at doing this. So that's another way that you can do it. And then I always say you can argue with opinion, but you can't argue with the data. So part of it is kind of just presenting the story to them, but also showing them other organisations that are doing it well, and how they are kind of using it to advance the business. Because, in my mind, there's no doubt that the organisations that are prepared for the future are the ones that are going to be kind of thriving in it as well.
Agreed. So it brings me to, I guess, 2 more formal questions for the proceedings. The first one is, what are some of the common mistakes or challenges that people come across when they're doing horizon scanning?
So I would say that a common mistake is thinking that horizon scanning or foresight, which is kind of thinking about using that insight, is confusing preparedness with prediction. Yeah, so this isn't about having the right answer. This is about being prepared. So that's kind of one thing. The other thing I think that comms teams, not just comms teams, organisations get wrong is thinking that this is a one-off activity that you can do as an offsite, and then maybe put in the cupboard and forget about until the next time that you do the offsite. So I would suggest that this is something that you need to embed in your day-to-day activity. So one of the things that I advise is, if you've got a strategic plan, then you need to test your assumptions against it. And then every time you're reviewing that, maybe you don't have to do it every day, maybe quarterly, you'll have a kind of another look at it just to say, are those assumptions correct? Because the world is moving really, really quickly, particularly around things like geopolitics. Is kind of what I'd say. And then the third thing is thinking it's someone else's job to do. I think this is something that everyone has a role to play in. And, we've all got different perspectives, and that we should all be involved in. So, it's not something that sits on the side. You can embed it in an already busy job. And actually, I would suggest that you will be less busy if you kind of think about that preparedness, because it will help you make choices about what you're doing today. And you might decide, actually, I'm not going to do that anymore, because actually there's no point. So that's kind of what I would suggest.
That's great. Very good advice. And last question is, if somebody is listening to this and like, you know what, I really need to do some horizon scanning, we've never done this before, where's the best place to start?
Oh my goodness. Right. So when I first started looking at this, there was nothing out there. There was literally nothing out there that was relevant to a comms team. So, I'm happy for people to get in touch with me, and I can send them the process that I go through. And I'm very happy to talk through the process that I use, or I can do it for them. It's up to them, really. But I think that's one of the things I need to do more of, actually, because I'm not really busy enough, is to kind of document some of this stuff. So when people are, well, they don't Google anymore, do they? They ask an LLM.
Yes.
That there's something on there that's useful that can help them to kind of get started in it, which is kind of basically what I had to do. Yeah.
That's very generous. We'll put your contact details into the show notes for our listeners. Now, there's 3 questions we ask every guest on the podcast. Are you ready for those?
I think so.
Okay. What is an unexpected or left of field way you've learned a valuable lesson about communication?
Ooh, I would say, and I live in the UK, and a lot of the organisations that I've worked with, in fact, most of the organisations I've worked with have been very global organisations. And a big lesson for me was when I I spent some time with a team in China, so I actually saw how they work day to day. And a big lesson for me was about the way that even if you're a global organisation, things are very much done from either a UK or US, I know you're in Australia, but UK or US centric lens. So things like meetings are never really inconvenient for us. They're usually marginally inconvenient for them. And some things about culture, about maybe kind of things like the speak up culture, for example. So the big lesson for me, and it really kind of tested me, was about when we're making decisions as communicators that impact a global team, are we looking at it from our very UK, US lens, or are we really being culturally aware? And actually, I've done a bit more work in terms of cultural intelligence since that. So I guess that's a left of field thing that I discovered.
Yeah, that's a great lesson. Thank you for sharing
And
that.
it sounds really simple, doesn't it? Like, of course, it's going to be different, but I mean, like, let me bring it to life a little bit. So one of the things that I noticed with the China team is in their lunchtime, which is generally when we were kind of starting to get busy and get things done before kind of Asia close out. They have a proper lunch, or they might kind of fall asleep. I don't know whether you do this as well. There is no prep sandwich at the desk as kind of we do it often in London. And so we would often put meetings in at their lunchtime. And I came back and said, we need to stop doing this. We need to stop doing this because it's not very inclusive. So it's just like some of those simple actions that you can do to make life easier for people, I think, and be actually more inclusive.
Yeah, we actually had an IBC APAC webinar last week on cross-cultural communication within the region. And it was really interesting. So we had an Australian woman who now lives in Thailand. We had a Japanese woman who lives in Tokyo, and she works for Edelman. And we had Mary Ann Kapui, who is Australian but of Papua New Guinean heritage, and she does a lot of cross-cultural work with Papua New Guinea. And it was just so interesting how people approach relationship building, and what's left unsaid is often more powerful than what was said, and all those sorts of things as well. So it's fascinating. And as you say, there's no one size fits all. You've got to really, really delve into the culture where you're communicating and think about it. Next question. What is a book or a podcast that you love and would recommend to our listeners? And it can be about anything.
All right. So I think I'm going to ignore the question and recommend 2 books, 1 podcast, but it'll become clear. So if I mentor quite a lot of people, and the book that I will always give them is Who Moved My Cheese, Spencer Johnson, which basically the premise, it's a fable about, two mice, but it's like the fear of change is often worse than the change itself. So that's one I will always give to people, which is presumably why it's a bit bestseller. A bit more of a serious book is Neuroscience for Organisational Change by Hilary Scarlett. If you haven't read it, you should do. Because it's about how the brain works. And I think by understanding how the brain works, it helps you to be a better change communicator. So there's that. And then the podcast, nothing to do with comms at all. It's a BBC one, which I think you can get on BBC Sounds, is Witness History. And it's a 10-minute podcast. So it's nice and short, but it's history told from the perspective of people that were there. So it's a brilliant one for storytelling. So I those are... So there are 3 there that people can listen to.
Great recommendations. Thank you. Last question. If you could wave your magic wand and change one thing about communication at work, what would it be?
Right. So I'm not going to say the obvious ones about things like measurement. I think I'm going to say, because I haven't got time to do that, I think I'm going to say it would be for practitioners taking the time to bring the outside in. So, I got up this morning without giving too much away. I will have scrolled TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, and then had a look at the news. It's very, very quick and to the point. And I think sometimes if you look at how we communicate in organisations now and how we did it 10, 15, 20 years ago, nothing really much has changed. So my magic wand would be about bringing more of the external knowledge about how people absorb information into organisations. Hopefully that's answered the question.
Yes, if we can do that together, that would be amazing.
We'll try our best.
We can make this happen. Anne-Marie, thank you so much for joining us today. If people want to find out more about you and the work that you do, what's the best way for them to do that?
So to find out more about the work we do, you can look at our website, which is www.truecomms.com. Or you can find me on LinkedIn, where I am at least 3 times a day.
Excellent. We love that. Anne-Marie, thank you so much for joining us on Less Chatter, More Matter today.
Thank you, Val. Thank you.